Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Again, I am Katie Batesman, the Content Director at SheCanCode, and today we are discussing turbocharging your career as a woman in tech. I've got the amazing Sonny Patel, the Chief Products and Technology Officer at Ultra, with me today, and she's here to share practical and actionable advice for women aspiring to reach top executive positions like CPO or CTO or our own position of CPTO. Welcome, Sonny. Thank you so much for joining us on Spilling the Tea.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for coming. I know you're a super busy lady, and thank you for taking the time out to come and have a chat with us. Can we kick off with a little bit of background about yourself, if that's okay, just to set the scene for our ladies, a little bit about you, how you got into tech, kind of a quick overview of whether or not you fell in and how you ended up in your role today.
Yeah, first of all, when I tell my story, I find it incredible that I've been in the tech industry for the past 20 years. Where has time gone? It just, in some ways it feels like I just started recently, and in other ways it feels like a lifetime has passed or many lifetimes have passed. So, to answer your question, my entry into tech industry took on a more traditional route. I started with an undergrad in computer science. This was back when I was in India, and then I came over to US to do my master's in computer science. And while I was getting my graduate degree at Texas A&M University in College Station, I was recruited by Dell. This was back in 2003, um, on an on-campus recruiting event, and that's how I got my first job break.
Amazing. Did you find when you went to the US it was suddenly very male dominated, or was that quite an equal split in those days and you thought actually this would be a really good career for me?
It was definitely a culture shock, and on so many levels, right? And from a lifestyle perspective, from getting used to how universities operate. So I think there was a lot to get used to. Um, and there was definitely an adjustment period involved there. From a perspective of um, tech industry being male dominated, it is, unfortunately. I know we all are aspiring that it would change. It's a long process. Um, Even at school, I remember having most of the students in my class um, being male. And that's something that I have to say, unfortunately, is something I'm used to, not just at school, but then as I went on to take on a full-time job at various companies, it wasn't quite uncommon for me sometimes to be the only woman in the room.
Mm.
Um, I think things are changing. I hope it changes faster, and for all of us to feel more supported.
Yeah. And you've stuck it out for the last 20 years and obviously had a successful career along the way. How did you land your current role as CPCO?
That is a long story. So when I look back at how I got to where I did, I can say that I absolutely did not know that this is where I will be 20 years down the line when I first got started. My sights were always on the next step, each step along the way. So, which meant that when I was doing my undergrad, my goal was to pursue graduate degree in US. So that's what I worked towards throughout my undergrad, in terms of writing the right exams and applying to the right unis. And when I was in my graduate school, my goal was to land my first tech job. And at the time, I was focused more on a development job where I actually got a chance to code and apply the learnings from my school. And when I did that at Dell, that was my first role, and I was there for 2 years. I set my sights on the next step. So it's always been looking at that next step, right? And some luck and some happy accidents along the way, and here I am.
Yeah, you made it. And luckily, you didn't feel like you wanted to leave as well at any point, which is what a lot of our ladies on this podcast say, that they left or came back in, or felt like they couldn't stick it out for the 20 years. On that note, I wanted to ask you a little bit about perhaps some of the challenges that you found along the way. 20 years is an impressive stint to stay in the tech industry. So I'm assuming you come up with faced quite a few challenges along the way. So what were some of your biggest challenges that you faced, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, and by the way, I have to completely agree with you that that is unfortunately a trend that we see with women in tech is around the mid-career stage is most of them leave. So we see this big, I mean, already to begin with, the beginning of the funnel, there's not as many women as men are, but as we move up in the career ladder, around the mid-career stage is where we see a steep drop off for a variety of reasons, right? So um, and in terms of facing challenges, right? So all of us do. That part, I think, is gender neutral. Each of us, whether we are male or female, have to overcome certain obstacles as we move up the career ladder, right? I mean, whether it is not getting that promotion when we think we deserve it, or being passed over for a juicier project when you really want it or feel that you deserve it. That kind of stuff, in my opinion, happens generally to all people. The one specific one, biologically, that is by definition women specific, is navigating having children while at work, right? And in my opinion, that tends to be probably one of the more nerve-wracking times for women to navigate through at work, uh, because I mean, there's just so much at stake, especially for women who want to stay in the workforce even throughout having children, and which I certainly did. By the way, have 3 children, um,
Wow.
ages 7, 4, and 1.
Oh
So
gosh, that's a lot.
we have a very noisy household. um, And I think that, I mean, I can get into more details, but I feel of all the situations that I've hit through my career journey, uh, those times probably made me the most nervous
Yeah.
in terms of how to navigate through that, through having a child and not letting that derail, my career trajectory.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting that you said previously, a lot of ladies, they reach that point in their career, and then they feel like they have to drop off, and that you didn't. Did you find yourself perhaps at just companies where you felt really supportive, where you could do that, and that's fine. You can still have that work-life balance, and have your children, and still feel like there's a great career to come back to, and that it didn't impact you. But I'm assuming a lot of that was down to the companies that you've been at that time.
100%. And it's the companies and specifically the people that I had around me. So, like I said, I had to do it 3 times. I think I had great experience 2 times, not so great 1 time. Happy to share both stories. So, you are 100% right that the situation surrounding us is possibly has a is the biggest plays the biggest role in terms of how supported we feel, and also increasing the probability of women returning after having a child. So the first time I had my first child while I was at Amazon, um, and um, and I the second time I had my child, I was at a mid-sized tech company based out of New York. And funnily enough, my manager in both places was the same person because I had followed him from Amazon over to this other company, right?
Mhm.
One of the biggest sponsors I've had in my career has had such a huge impact on, essentially, I give him a lot of credit to helping me get to where I am. Incredibly supportive. In fact, um, one of the things, and this was such a gift to me and gave me such enormous psychological safety, um, was when I was planning to join him at this newer company. I had actually um, shared with him that, hey, I just want to be open and honest. I am planning to have a second child. Is this the right time? Or, I don't want to come and join and kind of surprise you with news. And his response was, sure. He's like, I'll work with you anytime. Come over. Right. So, and to have that kind of support and that kind of unwavering, like no hesitation,
Yeah.
I have your back, just in my opinion, was, like from an emotional and mental perspective, s- such an encouraging factor, right?
Yeah.
I felt safe. I felt that I'm going to be taken care of even when I'm not at work. I don't have to worry about what's going on. I can focus on uh, my babies, and when I go back, I can be refreshed and then like hit the ground hard when I go back. So definitely having that support system, yeah, priceless. And that's where I talk about how the luck factor. I mean, sometimes despite our best efforts, we don't always have those people around us.
Yes, that is true. And it's so important when you do find that sponsor, and they are, as you said, that security as well. And I always think of a sponsor as somebody that's saying good things about you when you're not around as
That
well.
is
They
correct.
kind of have your back when you're not in the room, and they're the person that's saying, have you thought of that person for a possible project or a promotion? And they're just always there to advocate for you, especially if you're taking time at home on maternity leave as well. Just somebody that's always there to make sure that they name drop you, ready for when you do come back as well. So important when you do find somebody like that in your career.
That is a great definition of what a sponsor. That's exactly what a sponsor does, right? And I think another incredible experience I've had is that each time I went back. So after I went back, after having my first child, um, I was given the opportunity for the first time to lead managers. The term that we used um, for that role was mom, manager of managers. So prior prior to that, I had managed individuals directly. And so then, this was back in 2017. I take a break, maternity break. I take it for I utilize the entire time I was able to. And I go back, and not only am I welcome back with open arms, I'm actually given more scope and a promotion of sorts in terms of my role, which was incredible. Um, and the second time, this was in 2019. I had my second child in 2019. So when I went back to work in 2020, that is when COVID hit, and utter chaos. Um, and when I went back, that was the first, my team size, I think within the next year, my team size essentially, I think, tripled in size. So I was managing at least double, like almost tripled in size. I was managing about 75 folks before I left. And when I came back within a year, I was managing a team of over 200 people.
Oh gosh.
And
That's a
so,
lot.
So I think, I mean, talk about, coming back with a vengeance, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that is, I couldn't have asked for better support, and, better opportunities. And like I said, and the reason why I felt that I could just come back and just really get hyper focused on work was I got that clean break from work where I could just get focused on uh, my newborns at the time, my own recovery, and not have the emotional energy tied with what is going to happen. I mean, had to have had such a huge impact.
Yeah, and which obviously with those two positive experiences, you decided to go on and do it again.
Yeah, I was like, yes, right? I mean, and that's where there is a turn in the story. And the third time, and again, highlighting back to how the power of sponsorship, right? I did lose my sponsor when I was having my third child. Um, not not as great. No, didn't feel as supported, and
Yeah,
think um, definitely had a huge impact on my well-being. I definitely did have I still had supporters and support systems which kept me sane. But I think in a lot of ways I got to experience both sides of it.
yeah.
Uh, and ultimately when I did choose to go back, I just chose not to go back to the same company. I actually during my maternity break is when I started to job hunt and found this gig at Socotra, which I feel very blessed to be where I am today. And I can't believe I get to do what I do.
Yeah, and you're right to experience both sides of that fence, and then thinking, actually, I want to go on and find a company where I feel mentally safe again, and to leave somewhere. And that is, a lot of companies are not very good at retaining their staff in that way. But yeah, that you had that thought of, you know what, this isn't right for me anymore, and I need to find a company culture where I feel secure again, and I can feel like I can have that work-life balance, because you experience that, which so many of the ladies on this podcast talk about as well when they decide to have families. And on that note, it's as we said, a lot of ladies dip off at that mid-level in their career, and a lot of them would like to move up the ranks. Do you think there are any key steps that women should take if they aspire to become, something like a CPO, a CTO, or a CPTO? Is there anything that you think that key steps where they can actually get there if they do remain in their career in the first place? How do they even get there?
Yeah, and this is where so one of the things I did about 6 years in to my career is I always had this desire to get an MBA. And at the time, obviously, I mean, I computed the ROI of, you know, doing it full time, which would mean that I'm out of the workforce for 2 years. While I'm sure that's a great, excellent experience. For me, uh, the loss of income didn't feel like the right choice at the point. So I chose instead to do a part-time MBA. So I was at Microsoft, and I got into the MBA, evening and weekend MBA program at Berkeley's House School of Business, which meant that, and I was still in Seattle, so I had to fly down every weekend for 3 years. Sounds insane that I did that.
Yeah.
Although, although I had, so it's about an hour and a half flight. So it was the thing I did every Saturday for about 100 weekends. Um, so I still remember something one of the keynote speakers said when we first started. He said, "Now that you're here, now that you're doing an MBA, don't, he's like, I hope you guys didn't join this program thinking that, oh, this will help you become a product manager, right? Shoot for something higher, shoot to become the CEO, shoot to join the C suite. And if that's what you're shooting for, maybe you'll end up somewhere within that vicinity, right? So, I mean, left a mark. The fact that I still remember that and I'm sharing that with you definitely made an impression. So, I had this ambition or desire to make it into this C suite for a long time, right? And at the time, I didn't know how I was going to get there. And it seems like this audacious, impossible goal. Like, and especially when I think of myself, this was back in 2009. Um, but I always knew, okay, that's where I want to be. That's where I want to go, and all the moves I'm making are helping support that. Um, so I think that that's where the ideation started, I would say. In terms of what steps, I can only speak to myself. I can talk about my journey. There is no one size fits all. I think each of us carve out our own path, and it's based on what motivates us. A few key things that I help me, and I would recommend to women out there um, who want to move into an executive role is developing an individual point of view. I think that is something that helps you stand out in a lot of these, in my opinion, career making sessions, right? Because what leaders truly take notice of and appreciate is when somebody is able to, one, have that clarity of thinking and are able to clearly articulate original ideas to solve certain problems. Right now, the problems each of us tackle could be different, right? So, what that means for the domain that you're currently working in or want to develop expertise in, I mean, that's something you pick. There are so many resources, right? Now, obviously, the secret sauce and how do we develop this thought leadership or uh, come up with original ideas. um, we are so lucky that we are in the technological revolution where there's so much information available to us. Um, I read a lot. I mean, as you can tell, I listen to a lot of podcasts. I think listening to people talk. And I really think original thinking, while we call it original, is truly us in our own mind with our own wiring, remixing ideas that we hear from multiple sources.
Mm.
So I actually think the more sources we gather data from, I think our mind has this incredible ability to put it all together and um, kind of like our brain is an automatic, you know, Gen AI producing, um, you know, so I think that is key, to be honest. And if I can go back to what were some pivotal points in my career, it was essentially when I made decisions to drive when I was given the opportunity, but I jumped on it and drove an initiative and made it my own.
Yes. I'm
Yeah.
assuming as well that you, as you move through your career, you read those resources, you'd found your own idea, and also you just developed the confidence to be able to talk about that idea and to be able to share that with your executive team, for instance. So that takes a long time as well, doesn't it? You can't be thinking as a junior, actually, I've read all these things, but I'm really confident about how I'm going to tell the board the direction and confidently do that. That must have taken a while too.
Kelly, that is so spot on. By the way, that was going to be my second point is to do the work to build a strong inner core that is resilient. Easier said than done. It took me probably many, many years to do that. And I think one of the things I find now is as you move higher and higher up in the career ladder, one, tend to get less and less validation and also less and less feedback. so a lot of the times for you, like, there's not as much feedback coming your way to validate whether the decision you're making or the ideas that you're sharing are going well, right? So I think having that sense of, I mean, you said rightfully so, confidence, that even when you don't have adequate data points or feedback, you know that you're on the right path. It takes years. Some people probably naturally have it. I had to work on it. And you're 100% right. I think it just comes from practice. There's no other way to learn it other than to do it. Um, I mean, there have been, I think, meetings where I fell flat on my face and, very ouchy, had to pick myself up, dust myself, and say, oh, what did I learn? And let me not make the same mistake again. Um, but I think that along with that, I think, having the resilience to keep going, even when we have some setbacks, and having those opportunities provided to you, I think it's a combination of that.
Yes, definitely. I couldn't agree more. And obviously, you mentioned making sure that you've read a lot of resources and that you gathered all that knowledge. I love the fact you compared it to AI. You're absolutely right. It's like you're inputting all of that knowledge along the way to grow into your executive role. Were there any specific courses or certifications or resources along the way? Anything that you would recommend to our ladies that might be looking to supercharge their careers?
I actually recommend multiple sources. So some of my go-to sources tend to be the thought leaders in product management, for instance. They have their established YouTube channels or any of the podcast channels. Um, Lenny's podcast comes to mind. Jeffrey Moore comes to mind. I think these are very easy to, like I said, I think there are more resources than any of us can possibly cover in our lifetime. Uh, but here's my recommendation is I mix it up with some of the domain related podcasts. For example, right now I do spend at least a couple hours every week learning about insurance because that's the space that I'm in right now, right? I mix it up with keeping up with newer technologies or newer cloud-based development practices. And I spend some time as time I can fit time to learn about those. I I like that distribution across multiple topics because oftentimes that's where I think the brilliant ideas come in, is that when you mix and match ideas from different spaces. And sometimes I just watch videos about psychology. I also spend a lot of my free time reading fiction. So I think that it is a combination of all of those sources, I think, is where the spark of brilliance happens, in my opinion.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, not just from one place, but lots and lots of different places. I couldn't agree more. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the interview process because as you move through your career, obviously that changes a lot. The interview process is very different as you become a little bit more senior than it is when you're, fresh out of university and you're kind of testing the water at that point as well because you don't really know how to interview properly and it seems to take a few tries before you kind of get that right as well. But can I ask you a little bit about, do you have any top tips for preparing for a technical interview? That's something that our ladies ask us a lot about technical interviews. Do you have any top tips for that?
Yeah, that could, by the way, be a podcast by itself. So the first thing
Yeah.
I would say is that interviews need a lot of preparation. I think I made a fatal mistake of walking into an interview very early in my career and thinking I'll just charm the interviewer. Um, and went so badly that I would probably never make, life lesson learned, never make that mistake. This was, by the way, when I was at Texas A&M and I interviewed for an internship role at Microsoft. And so woefully unprepared, it was embarrassing. And I think it doesn't matter what level the interview is, there is preparation needed. And especially for technical interviews, I would say depending on how technical the role is, it could take almost 6 months to prepare. So it's a non-trivial investment in preparation, right? So it's not something that we can, study over a weekend or a week even.
It's quite interesting to hear that you went into a technical interview really unprepared. So is there a tips for technical interviews where you think, you know what, this is what you should prepare for?
Yeah, I think that most of the technical interviews are broken into three segments, right? So there is a portion of the interview that is focused on asking the candidate behavioral questions based on to learn more from how they have done approach things in the past, learn about their past successes, mistakes, how they've dealt with them. And there is, again, so just that section, a lot of material online, especially on YouTube, a lot of channels, some better than the others, about what kind of behavioral, and there's a standard question bank, and I'll approach how to answer that, right? And there is another portion which is focused on coding skills, and especially if this is a role, like an engineering role that requirements development skills, and that in order to prepare for that there is a lot of practice needed, both from understanding the fundamental algorithms and data structures that are the foundation of computer science. But also, I think the type of algorithmic questions that get very sophisticated, um, and requires probably this is the portion that requires the most amount of preparation. And the third portion is system design. And these would be questions such as how would you design an Uber, a system for Uber? And it challenges the candidate to think through how they, would set up the design, how would they think about the users, the use cases, how the system is getting used, the scale of it. And then as you build the system, the interviewer is probably poking to understand how you would design around certain roadblocks. Again, significant preparation needed. Lots of material online for that, right? So those tend to be, for most of the technical interviews, the three main aspects that candidates get asked questions around.
Yeah. And obviously when you reach the executive level, that's very different. Is there anything there where you think it's what are you showcasing at that point? How do you showcase your skills at that point if you're not doing something on a technical level, for instance, like showing, coding skills, but actually you've reached more of an executive, you're probably going to be talking more about management skills and more soft skills, I suppose.
I think that one of the key things to showcase and more, and I think that this shows up at every level, I think becomes more important at an exec level, is how you approach decision makings.
Yeah.
How do you deal with nuance and not get too dogmatic about certain beliefs and dig your heels in, right? I mean, how do you, and I think that the way to showcase that is to take up examples from your past. To tell a story, I think one of the standard formats is a star format, where you start talking about the situation, and you talk about the task at hand, your approach to it, and what the results are. So, and again, the more one quick tip on how to approach any of these behavioral questions or talking about your past is to build a collection of examples ahead of time, um, and almost map it to, hey, this example I can utilize to showcase, for instance, how I made a decision with incomplete data. But it could also be to showcase when I had to deal with disagreement on the team and how I drove, arriving at a decision through that process, right? So having that map of a few key stories and to what scenarios you can utilize them, and practicing telling those stories ahead of time so that in an interview setting you're not looking for words, super key for that. um, I mean, one of the advice is to use somebody that you can do a mock interview with. I have to admit, I personally get very shy practicing it with another individual. So I tend to practice in front of a mirror. So whatever works for you, right? So
Yeah, great advice though, because you are right. It's if you're practicing with someone, and especially I've had people tell me that you should practice with a child because they are incredibly honest and will give their feedback. Also, it can be strange talking to somebody that you know or a relative, and you're right, you are very different sometimes. So in front of a mirror works absolutely fine too, unless you want that brutal, honest feedback from a child that you know.
and also recording yourself is incredibly helpful because I
Yeah.
think all of us feel this way. When I record myself and listen to my voice, I feel that is not how I sound in my head at all. You know?
Yes.
And
And body language at that point, you're right. Seeing a recording of yourself. I was told years ago that I was interviewing somebody and I was fidgeting and I didn't know I was kind of rocking on my heel. And it was very distracting on the video as well. And I hadn't even noticed. It was just a nervous thing. So
yeah,
you're right,
yeah.
doing that for an interview. Yeah, great advice.
Yeah, and I think that personally for me, I have this bad habit of using these filler words like and I probably did that throughout this interview as well. But I found that when I'm not prepared, I tend to use those filler words more often. So it actually works in my own best interest if I'm repeating a story that I've told before, even if it's to myself, right? So I think that personally, that's how I've seen the practice help myself.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, and all that comes down to again being prepared for an interview
Yeah,
and
I think it was one of those mistakes I only had to make once. I would
yeah,
never do it
yeah,
again.
one of those life lessons. Yeah, yeah. Um, we are almost out of time, but I wanted to ask you quickly, how can women in tech develop their own thought leadership and make an impact in the industry? You spoke a little bit about, when you become an executive, finding your own voice, and that's what your team are looking for as well, your management board and your stakeholders. So how can women in tech find a way to develop their own thought leadership to make an impact?
Yeah, and I think that this is what makes us all so unique and makes the value we bring to the table so unique, and why, in my opinion, some we thrive in certain places and we don't, right? I mean, the exact same person could be enormously successful in one company and crash and burn in another. I go back to uh, one of the Amazon's leadership principle which says leaders are right a lot. And that is, in my opinion, uh, both a key skill to develop as a leader, as well as a key measurement to measure a leader's effectiveness, right? And it's something that I ask myself, am I more right? It's not, I mean, it's impossible to not be wrong, but am I more right than I'm wrong? And that's how I know. And I think in order to be right is where that developing that thought leadership comes in, right? So the only way to develop it and call it thought leadership, call it judgment, is by going through certain experiences. Um, and I think at this point, for example, I have some strong opinions about how I approach my team's performance. I have strong opinions about um, what kind of organization structures I think are more effective, right? And I would call these strong opinions weakly held, because while I hold those opinions, I'm also open to being persuaded to change my mind with the right data presented to me. And ultimately, that is a role I'm in. I'm going to make some calls. Um, and if I'm right and I'm helping the company be successful, then keep me and reward me. If I'm wrong and turns out that I'm more wrong than I'm right, rightfully so, I should be fired. So And I think that I would not be able to make those decisions or have that conviction in my decisions had I not gone through all the experiences, good and bad experiences that I've gone through through my career, right? So truly, I think that's been the journey, right? I don't think it's realistic to expect anybody to right off the bat be an amazing decision maker.
Yes. Yes, definitely. And something we say on this podcast a lot of the ladies on here, they say when they step into leadership for the first time, they're expected to have all of the answers and to know everything. And they wish that somebody had told them years ago that you don't have to know everything straight off the bat. And that just because you've stepped into a leadership position doesn't mean that suddenly you have to know everything. You still have your team there that you can turn to, and they're doing, you know, the day to day. But you're right, it gets to that point where you get to that level where, you know, you should be making the decisions, and you do know that you are right about making those decisions because you have more experience as well over the rest of your team. So, you know, you should be making them with conviction, as you said. And that is a confidence that takes a very long time to build, from life's experiences, as you said, good and bad.
And by the way, I do want to second what you said, Kelly. I think right on. Having the right people around you
Mm.
probably is, the single most important factor to determine whether you're successful. At this point, by the way, I have an amazing set of direct reports, and I could honestly say I think each of them is probably way smarter than I am. So a lot of my decisions tend to be based on input they're providing me. So I think that would be another tip, is that do not compromise on who you have around you, right? So if um, I think that if the people who are around you are better at you than in some aspects, and obviously I think to balance that out, I do think there are some strengths I bring to the table, but together we are stronger as a team. And again, with that lack of, I had to get to that point where I was secure enough to have these really smart people around me and not feel threatened just because I know that they know way more about a certain topic, and to also have that confidence in my own abilities that, while others are bringing value in certain areas, there are a few areas that I bring to the value I bring to the table as well, right? So you're absolutely right. I think there is no possible way I would know I have all the knowledge or the information to make all the decisions. I feel the reason why I'm able to do so is because I have such a strong team around me.
Yeah. Yeah, really important, to find the right team, and to just be in a company where, as we said right back at the start, that you can be yourself and bring your authentic self as well to work every day, and feel mentally happy and stable. Otherwise, people find themselves having to go elsewhere, unfortunately. Sonny, we're already out of time. I could keep picking your brain on this topic, but we are already out of time, I'm afraid. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your insights today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on here and chatting with you.
Again, thank you so much for having me on. This was fun.
Thank you. And for everybody listening, as always, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again next time.